Welcome back to Climate Voters Tonight. We here at EDF Action hope you had a great Earth Day. I know I did. Speaking of Earth Day, we have an amazing event planned for this Friday at noon Eastern, where we are going to be joined by our partners to talk about climate and clean energy investments. We'll put the event link in the comment section. And as always, I'm your host, Peter Schleisman, and we are so thrilled that you've joined us tonight as we cover the climate news that you need to know. We've got a great show for you tonight, but before we get started, I'd like to give a quick shout out to my colleagues Cecile Brown and Hannah Blatt for stepping in as hosts last episode while I was in Wisconsin with EDF Action PAC helping to elect their next state Supreme Court Justice, Janet Protasiewicz. Wow, that feels really good to say. All right, so this is our 6th episode, and after hearing lots of great feedback from you, our audience, we've decided to switch up the format just a bit. As climate activists, we understand that most of you are pretty tuned into the news. Our goal is to bring you stories you're not going to hear anywhere else and take deep dives into the issues you care most about. So this week, we're going to begin with the headlines and condense the content you've heard about elsewhere so that we can spend more time covering the unique stories you care about. We'll start tonight with the EPA and how they're working to set new vehicle emission standards. This, along with the historic climate laws we've passed, will turbocharge the manufacturing and sales of electric cars and trucks. Then we'll head out west. Normally, what happens in Vegas stays there. But trust me, sometimes that rule needs to be broken. Our Nevada organizer Mark met up with Senator Jacky Rosen for a tour of one of the Silver State's thriving rooftop solar businesses. And finally, we're going to take a deep dive into an aspect of climate change too often forgotten, how it threatens our cultural heritage. We'll take you to the remote mountain villages of northern New Mexico and explore how extreme weather is threatening a dialect of Spanish spoken nowhere else on Earth. Let's begin. Here are this week's headlines in climate news. For over a year, the Biden administration has been trying to confirm Joe Goffman and David Uhlmann to the EPA, but they haven't gotten a vote in the Senate yet. That's why we need you to use your voice. Go to edfaction.org/nominees and tell the Senate to confirm them. Motorists across South Florida have had to endure long lines and shortages at the pump after heavy rains flooded the region's infrastructure, complicating fuel companies' ability to transport gasoline to gas stations. Talk about irony. Extreme weather fueled by climate change is disrupting the fossil fuels that caused the weather to begin with. Speaker Kevin McCarthy unveiled House leadership's debt limit plan on April 19th. It's a reckless and partisan attempt to undo key climate accomplishments that we made last year. The plan would kill thousands of new, good-paying jobs that are being created as part of President Biden's clean energy plan. And the kicker? Almost 2/3 of those jobs are estimated to be in districts held by the GOP, according to a report by Politico. The debt ceiling fight will continue to evolve. And don't worry, we will be your one-stop shop for all the latest. In the meantime, let your representatives know that they cannot vote for this plan by visiting edfaction.org/debt ceiling. Moving on. We're going to spend just a couple minutes talking about the EPA. But first, I'd like to back up and talk about pollution from cars and trucks on our roads. Our transportation sector is the single largest source of climate pollution in the U.S., responsible for almost 1/3 of our emissions. It's also responsible for harmful air pollution from car and truck tailpipes that we breathe every day, on our way to work, on our way to school. But there is good news. The Environmental Protection Agency is hard at work protecting our health and cleaning up our air. On April 12th, the Biden administration proposed what the New York Times called the nation's most ambitious climate regulations to date. With these new standards, EPA estimates that in 2032, about 2/3 of the new cars and passenger trucks sold in America will be zero-emissions vehicles, and so will up to half of new urban delivery and freight vehicles. This would be a historic effort to slash climate pollution. At the end of the day, this proposed standard will save lives and address the climate crisis. And consumers will also see huge savings, including thousands of dollars in lifetime fuel cost savings and maintenance costs. And of course, we have the tax credits to go along with it that will save customers up to $7,500 on a new EV, up to $4,000 on a used EV, and up to $40,000 on a new commercial truck or bus. As soon as these proposed standards are published in the Federal Register and open for comments, we will make sure you know where, when, and how you can voice your support for this critical standard. All right, moving on. Let's go to Vegas to learn about sustainability. Our 8 words never before put together in the English language.
This is Vegas.
But that's changing.
If there's one thing Nevada is known for, apart from casinos, lights, and flashy shows, it's the nearly year-round sunny weather. In fact, with over 210 sunny days per year on average, Las Vegas is the nation's 3rd sunniest city, according to data from Redfin. So it's no surprise that solar companies are cashing in.
I won! Look at this! I won $11 million!
EDF Action's own Nevada organizer, Mark, recently joined Nevada Senator Jacky Rosen to tour one of those businesses. Rosen, who was a leader in getting the Inflation Reduction Act across the finish line last August, touted how this historic clean energy plan is bringing billions of dollars in federal investments to Nevada. And the payoff of federal dollars for the Silver State's economy isn't limited to just solar. According to a new report from the Environmental Defense Fund, federal initiatives have generated over $13 billion in investments for electric vehicle manufacturing and created 12,400 new jobs. To quote Senator Rosen,
so it's a win, win, win. I think in Nevada, what do we call it? The trifecta, right? It's a triple win.
We all want our leaders to continue leaning in on bold climate and clean energy solutions. That's why we're going to encourage you to tweet at Senator Rosen using her handle at Senator Jacky Rosen and thank her for her clean energy leadership. And please be sure to tag at EDF Action as well. All right, staying in the Southwest, we now turn our attention to New Mexico. Here, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham has complicated her climate record. While starting out her first term strong, she set high expectations as a national leader on climate policy by signing an executive order directing state agencies to address climate change, approving legislation to establish a new renewable energy standard, and establishing New Mexico's first rules aimed at reducing methane waste from the oil and gas industries, and setting bold commitments to reduce climate pollution by 45% by 2030. Grisham's administration was certainly on the right track, but recently she has complicated her record by failing to support climate legislation this past legislative session that would have required significant cuts in pollution and ensured a just transition to a clean energy future. And unfortunately, after walking away from legislation that would have paved the way for the regulations necessary to achieve the state's climate targets, the governor also opposed incentives to help accelerate the state's clean energy transition, withholding her signature on 5 key clean energy tax incentives. Lack of climate leadership hurts the state. We need New Mexico's leaders to act on climate by leveraging their existing authority, passing new legislation that sets firm emissions reductions targets, and establishing a pathway to transition people working in fossil fuels. All right, staying in New Mexico, let's talk about one aspect of climate disruption often overlooked. Nestled deep in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, straddling New Mexico's northern border with Colorado, a 400-year-old community of Spanish speakers is struggling to hold on to an ancient dialect spoken nowhere else on Earth. The language, known to linguists as Upper Rio Grande Spanish, was brought to these mountains in the late 16th century, decades before the first permanent English colony in the New World was established at Jamestown. For the next 4 centuries, settlers lived in relative isolation from the rest of the Spanish-speaking world. Supply caravans sent from Mexico City served as their main form of contact with colonial authorities. But when disruptions hit, these remote villages could be cut off for years at a time. And it was this isolation that nurtured the development of a dialect so unique that a modern-day Spaniard could be forgiven for mistaking it with the language spoken by their great-great-great-grandparents. Although probably only for a sentence or two. You see, while the Spanish speakers of this region are known for their archaic verb conjugations, They seem equally fond of ditching the vocabulary of yesteryear in exchange for catchier, new slang overheard on the lips of westward bound English settlers. So next time you're in Cuesta, New Mexico, don't be afraid if your almuerzo order falls on deaf ears. They call it lonche here. And if you're visiting around the holidays, you do best to skip Feliz Navidad on the jukebox. It's called Christmas in these parts. It's a unique tension between old and new, less of a melting pot and more of a mixing bowl. This language feels uniquely American in a way. It's a product of centuries of cultural clashes, a living testament to the pain, the joy, the struggles, and the resilience of generations, which makes its slow but steady decline all the more tragic. You see, New Mexico Spanish has always existed on the brink. Ever since the area was ceded to the United States in 1848, pressure has been mounting on its speakers to abandon the language and adopt English. But for nearly 200 years, the community held on, protected by the isolation afforded by its mountains and desert. And that's changing. As the internet tears down obstacles to communication, more and more children are growing up speaking only English. Those who do learn Spanish are increasingly adopting the more widely spoken varieties of northern Mexico. But it's climate change that might pose the biggest threat to the language yet. More severe and more frequent extreme weather has rocked this community's traditional homelands in northern New Mexico and exacerbated the region's economic challenges. Last spring, a prescribed burn in the Santa Fe National Forest, fueled by extreme drought and powerful winds, turned into New Mexico's largest recorded wildfire. It burned right through the heart of the state's traditional Spanish-speaking population, reducing hundreds of homes to ash and displacing thousands. New Mexico, along with most of the Southwest, is now mired in the worst megadrought since before the Spanish settlers arrived in this area 4 centuries ago. The village of Cuesta, one of the language's strongholds, has lost population nearly every year since 1999. It's a reminder that the effects of climate change penetrate far beyond the tangible. As our planet warms, we risk losing generations of wisdom and art passed down through cultural practices. The story of New Mexican Spanish is but one example. All right, that'll do it from us tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in to Climate Voters tonight. As always, this video will be uploaded to YouTube, so please feel free to share it with your friends, your family, and your network. And if you've got questions you'd like us to cover in next week's episode, please visit edfaction.org/questions. Climate Voters Unite.